Well, I think that wraps that up and rolls us into our other various topics this week. And those of you that were really like coming to the show exclusively for tiny news, we don't have any tiny news this week. We just have the other bigger topics, and I'm
Oh,
so
I can get you
sorry.
some tiny news. I can get you some tiny news.
Okay, good. I know some people come here just for the tiny news segment in the last like 5 minutes. Like that's
Oh,
important. They
totally.
watch the whole thing so they can see that tiny news. So the next topic though that we wanted to talk about was Mozilla. The Mozilla organization makes Firefox, as some people here, well, actually most probably know, but most of you have probably heard of Firefox, and Mozilla runs Firefox, right? So
What's Firefox?
even most normal people, right, that they know Firefox, but they may not know that it's developed by Mozilla. Mozilla is the organization that develops that, and unfortunately, they have been struggling financially due to the coronavirus pandemic, and so they had to lay off 250 people, which doesn't sound like I mean that's a lot of people, but it doesn't sound like a huge number in comparison to some of the other layoffs we've seen. But keep in mind, they only had 1,000 employees, so that was a quarter of their workforce. They're down to 750 people now, which is still
Yeah.
not like minuscule for an open source development place.
And this includes their entire MDN team, which makes like a bunch of documentation for developers on new things within web. So this actually like has an adverse side effect in just overall web development.
Yeah, and that was actually something before I start talking about what some of their future plans are, I wanted to touch base on was Mozilla and Firefox as a whole have been a huge benefit to the internet in general. It's not just that they've made a browser, right? Like Firefox has, or Mozilla has developed a lot of stuff that has actually helped in terms of coding and stuff for the internet and for websites. And it's just disappointing to see some of that being damaged because of, in some ways, in my opinion, unfair competition, which I'll get to later. And so I'm just, it disappoints me that this is happening, but I understand why they had to do it, right? Like they are struggling financially. They've had a very, they're dwindling in market share. They have less than 10% of the browser market share now. And that was as of, I think that changed this year. I think we reported that in another WordCast. And so I'm personally disappointed in this, but I understand why they had to do it. Um,
Yeah.
it's it's kind of sad. Like it's a little bit emotional because Firefox has been something that's been really important in more ways than most people know, right? They've been
Yeah.
important for a lot of
Well,
stuff.
like with the MDN thing, like they have an entire um like platform, like a learning area on their website to learn how to become like a front end developer.
Yeah,
Um,
like
and
that's
it's
a
like,
big deal.
yeah, they've had this since like 2015, and it's like a very good like list of documents and guides and stuff. And so them having to get rid of that, including like it especially sucks because they just added new features for it in June.
Yeah,
And now they're laying off the entire team that did that, and so it's not going to get updated anymore.
yeah, and it sucks. And so I do want to, speaking of that team though and stuff, I do want to mention to some people that may be questioning it because there's a lot of people on Reddit asking about it. The Servo browser project is
Mm.
not being halted because of this. Mozilla is still a sponsor of that. They still have developers working on it. And for those that don't know, Servo is a new browser engine that they're working on that I think is eventually supposed to replace the Gecko engine that Firefox runs on now. That is a parallelized, really high performance browser is the goal, and it's like built from the ground up. And so we'll see if we start to see a dwindle in the amount of code updates to that, but they're claiming that it shouldn't see much of an effect. So I hope that's true. And in fact, I
I
forgot.
would be surprised if it did, since from my understanding, Samsung is also working on it. So
Yeah,
there's
yeah, there's
probably
like
some
lots of
some
sponsors.
separate funding mechanism for that.
Yeah, it's not like it's Firefox's, like it's not like Mozilla's the only one doing it, right? It's not
Yeah.
their like Gecko is the same thing where it's primarily developed by Mozilla, but like it is open source, right? It's kind of like Chromium and the Chromium project and Blink, right? Where it's like an open source sort of thing, and it looks like Servo could be a really big deal. I don't know if there's a lot of I wish I could find a good list of the sponsors. Their site is not the best at that. But the main primary sponsor is Mozilla, and it's written in Rust, so which is a pretty interesting programming language.
That's Rusty.
Rusty. So a couple of other things about this. So Taipei office has completely closed. Mozilla's Taipei office is done for. So that also sucks, but their U.S. office is still in place. And
That's good because I know where one of their U.S. offices is.
yeah,
It's
so
right
it's
next to
good.
my work.
Yeah, exactly. And so the way they're planning to make money around this is they want to try and start making money from services they provide instead of just sponsorships, which I'll talk about the sponsorships in a second. But they've got their VPN service, which is pretty good. I'd actually encourage people to go check it out. It's a pretty interesting VPN service. It's maybe not as feature packed in some ways as like PIA and stuff like that, but it is good, and I trust their privacy and security probably more than pretty much any of the other VPN services that are out right now, including PIA. I have some questions because of them getting bought out by whatever company it was, and it wasn't. I can't remember if it was Norton. I think maybe bought them. I can't remember. Somebody bought them, but yeah.
Now,
So
do you know much about Molvad?
no.
Okay, because that's who they're actually using for their servers. Like Mozilla is not spinning up their own VPN servers.
Right, but they do have a
They're
level of
essentially,
control.
yeah, they're essentially like selling their software over Molvad's servers.
Right. Well, it's kind of like all the alternate cell carriers, that similar style thing.
Yeah,
Yeah, so they're just using they're harnessing the server power from somebody else, but they do have a lot of locations. It seems to be a pretty reliable service. And then one of the other things that they're hoping to make money on is Pocket, right? Which they bought Pocket a while ago. Some people say maybe it wasn't the best idea to buy it, but Pocket is a service to save like news articles and stuff that you want to read. And there is a premium version of it that doesn't just pull the data from the site, but actually stores a copy of that Pocket listing. And so even if somebody takes down a website, you can still view your Pocket listing that's a copy of that site. Among some other benefits that you get with Pocket Premium. And so that's one that I would maybe encourage people to go with if they don't need a VPN service, if you just are interested in helping support them. It's I think it's $5 a month, and it's got quite a few features that go along with it. And Pocket is actually particularly interesting in my experience because one of the things is when there's research articles and stuff, I like to read them on my Kobo, and Kobo integrates with Pocket directly. Pocket tries to integrate with a lot of services, and so like I can save an article to Pocket from my feed reader, and then I can go read that on something that's better for my eyes at a later point in time.
yeah. Another thing that Mozilla also does that I don't think right now brings in a lot of money, but I think if they can scale it up, it will, is they have Firefox Reality, which is like a content platform for virtual reality content, and you can use it on your Vive, on your
Yeah,
Oculus,
that's
on
right.
Windows AR
It's pretty cool.
devices. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's another awesome thing that they're doing that you can go try if you have a VR headset. And then to jump into their sponsorships and stuff a little bit here. So they've made most of their money in the past off of like Google and other search engines, but primarily Google paying to be the default
Yeah, it's
browser.
Google in the US. I forgot the name of the Russian one, but there's like a different one in Russia and a different one in certain parts of Asia.
Yeah. And so they pay to be the default. Like that's a competition thing where browsers will kind of, or not browsers, search engine companies will kind of bid to be like, hey, we'll pay to be the default on your browser. And so Google has been the primary one and they've been making most of their money off of that. They don't make a lot off of like their homepage ads and stuff like that. And obviously it's an open source project. They're not like selling the code for this or anything either. So
Yeah, and
yeah.
in the context of Mozilla and Google, they have like renewed their agreement. It's not fully confirmed like to the public yet,
Mm-hmm.
so we don't have an exact dollar amount, but it's estimated to be between 400 and 450 million a year through 2023.
Okay, so yeah, they'll at least be around until that point in time, and hopefully that gives them enough time to start making revenue in other directions, in
Yeah,
case Google doesn't renew it again. Because if their market share continues to dwindle, Google's not going to care about paying for it then at that point.
no, they will.
You think so?
It's a monopoly protection thing.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, that's actually a really good point. And that was something that I wanted to touch base on too. Is like, it's a lot of people use Chrome, and a lot of that is because of branding and advertising, and that's part of what's made the Chromium project so popular, and why most alternate browsers are using the Chromium project instead of Gecko, and use the Blink engine, is because that's what every site's built for now, because most people use Chrome. Um, and Microsoft Edge being pushed in that direction as well has kind of dwindled that even more, and now it really is like you kind of can't count apples because Safari isn't on PC anymore. So it really is a duopoly sort of thing, right? Where you have Chromium and you have Gecko.
Yeah, and like I wonder how much all of the drama with Firefox Send hurt them financially too.
I didn't hear a ton about that actually. So
So
what was going on with it?
So for those that don't know, Firefox Send is disabled. And the reason that it's currently disabled is because it was being used to send malware back and forth, among
Oh,
other things. And so they are changing some things. When they reopen, you'll have to use a Firefox account to be able to utilize it. You won't be able to just send information anymore. And
hmm.
then they're trying to figure out ways to improve reporting and abuse and stuff, abuse protections and stuff. Um,
That's disappointing that people had to ruin that because it was a good feature. It was a good
it was
service.
a good feature, and it's like it's one of those things they spent a bunch of money developing, and then it got, you know,
Ruined by
taken advantage of so that
assholes.
people could send malware.
That sucks. Yeah, because they could send like a browser link, right? And then it looks legit because it's from,
Well,
you know,
yeah,
Mozilla.
that, and then
Yeah.
also like if you're like selling malware code, you could
You can
send the
transmit it that way.
file. Yeah,
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, so it was a pretty privacy focused one too, so it was less likely that you'd run into
yeah. They only
virus
suspended that
scans.
last month, so we don't really have an estimate as to when it's going to be brought back.
Maybe they'll bring it back with like a premium feature that adds more speed or something. I don't know, but they're definitely
Yeah, well, like, and
looking.
that's why I had even pulled it up now. As I was wondering if they had like a premium option for sending larger file sizes and stuff.
Yeah, because that would be interesting. You know, high speed, large file size sending. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see what happens when it comes back, but I would encourage people to, in some way, if you care about there being more openness in the browser markets and stuff like that, and care about what Mozilla has done for the internet, to try and go support them in one way or another. You know, by paying for Pocket Premium, paying for the VPN, or just trying to get more users on Firefox. And while they don't make money from that, like just having the bigger market share is a justification to try and charge places like Google even more potentially for their default browser. But then also having bigger market share, more people being aware of it, it's more likely that they'll go try those other services like the VPN. And especially being so privacy focused, like people will care about potentially using their VPN and stuff like that.
Yeah,
I just realized I've been slowly moving away from the mic. I apologize, everybody.
good job.
Just like slowly getting quieter.
Good
Um,
job.
I am a good job. So the next thing I wanted to talk about here was just an interesting topic to me. So there's been a bunch of updates to the new Storinator chassis from 45 drives. For those that don't know what it is, it's a big server chassis that's designed to hold a massive amount of hard drives, specifically for like network attached storage usage, and also like clustering network attached storage usage. So potentially 10 of these in a big server rack or something like that, or 20 of them. And so there's been some updates to the chassis that have been actually really interesting, and so I wanted to touch base on them really quick. So they did some redesigning on the chassis. It has better airflow now, including better airflow for the rear chamber where all of the other components are. And I will say I have direct experience with the Storinator. I've worked with the Storinator 60 drive model and built an ASIN one, so I do have some direct experience, and it already is one of the quietest storage servers I've ever dealt with. Particularly least annoying because it has pretty low pitch fans. They don't whine as much, so it's not as annoying when it's running. Power supplies are still a little loud, but the cooling performance in that rear chamber has actually not been a big issue in my experience. Now, the use case that the one that I work on is in is not under a really high CPU load very often, so maybe some other people have had some issues, especially if they don't have like an air conditioned room that it's running in. But it's still cool to see an improvement there, even on an area that, in my experience, doesn't really need improvement. So that was nice. And then they've also one of the biggest change to the design is they have a back plane for the drives now, and they're calling it a direct wire back plane. So those that have looked at it or watched Linus Tech Tips or something before, they have these little SATA and SAS adapters, and then they're plugged into a wire directly and mounted in the chassis, and so you put the drives into that. This new back plane is similar, but it's one PCB, but still everything is wired up directly, and so it's a little bit more reliable, a little bit easier for things to be aligned and stuff like that. So it is an improvement. The cages for the hard drives, and by cages I mean the chamber that they all go in, is now modular, removable, so you can take it out to work on things easier. Because that was one of the other things, is when you had a cable fail, it was a huge pain to fix the thing. So like, I hope that never happens to the one I built. Taking these things apart can be a pain, so this is a big improvement. Vibration is lower. And then the big one that I'm really excited about, the biggest one in my opinion, is Epic server CPUs are now finally on the Storinator. And in some ways, that's not like this hugely necessary thing, because of the fact that like most of it's just these big hard drives, right? And so like a lot of times they're not under high CPU load, but there are workloads where you would have it under high CPU load, or potentially run a bunch of virtual machines, and having that ability to do high core count CPUs and stuff is like awesome.
Yeah.
I think it's exciting. I see that you're finding some tiny news here. So for those that are really waiting out for that, that's exciting.
Yes.
But yeah, so I was happy to see some changes on that. The thing's been around for quite a while, and it's some much needed adjustments in my opinion. So definitely cool. So another thing in relation to storage that I did want to talk about here was FreeNAS/TrueNAS. So there was a TrueNAS 12.0 beta 2 update. It's now available. I have not installed it on my NAS yet. I'm actually not running TrueNAS. Yes, I'm on FreeNAS still, but it's focused around performance increases. I know it's in beta, and I do have data I really care about there, so I don't want to nuke anything.
Excuses. Wait, no excuses.
I may go for it. The way they've changed their like build sets, like this beta here is actually closer to what would have been the release channel in the past. So most people that have talked about it, the only thing they've had issues with is plugins, which I don't really use anymore. So I may go ahead and just switch to it and give it a shot. But it still makes me nervous, because I'd hate to have to re-download all my data.
No excuses.
No excuses. So they've improved NUMA support. That is for like multiple CPUs and stuff like that, as well as the architecture that Epic uses, so it could potentially improve performance on the new Storinator. So NUMA node performance has been increased. They also have a really big update to the level 2 ARC, which is essentially a read cache, to put it simply. And so that is they have a persistent on reboot level 2 ARC. And so what you'd have to do in the past, when you had a level 2 ARC, which was usually on a SSD, and that's address replacement cache, I think, or not address, something else, but you'd have it on an SSD, but then when the server rebooted, it'd have to rebuild that. And so say you had like a 10 terabyte L2 ARC, it would take like forever for the server to get back up to the full performance that it was before the reboot. So that's a big deal, is now it's persistent, where it can reboot and that data is still there ready to go. And then OpenZFS 2.0 includes faster boot times, which in my opinion is much needed. FreeNAS takes forever to boot up, so I'm excited to try that. SMB single client performance has been improved, and the max number of clients is 50% increased. NFS single client performance has been improved. But one of the things that I put in bold here, because I actually wanted to Daniel to touch base on this too, because this was something we talked about in the past. So they now are utilizing non-volatile memory DIMMs, which is something that, remember when we talked about those when they first came out, we're like, what is going to be the use case for this? It'll be interesting to see.
Mm-hmm.
We're finally starting to see some of that in even more like consumer type products. And so what it is essentially the write cache, the ZFS intent log, or slog, has been put on NVDIMMs. Like, you can put it on NVDIMMs now, and actually each NVDIMM can be assigned to its own storage pool. So that's really, really cool. There's a lot of benefits that can come along with that. And so I think it's cool to just finally see those being used, because we haven't seen them anywhere really.
Yeah.
And then the last thing in regards to that is they have done some stuff to improve performance. IX Systems has helped ZFS 2.0 support asynchronous copy on write performance and DMU. So that's just some performance improvement that I won't go into mega detail about, but pretty cool to see a big update like that. It's pretty huge.
I feel like you should have a show called Mega Detail.
Mega detail. It's like pick one topic and talk about it in a ton of detail every week.
Like an unnecessary amount. Like you have like a 4-hour podcast on something super minor.
Yeah. I think that could actually be kind of fun. Yeah,
it's like so entertaining. Everyone would just love.
Everybody would watch it. Like, hey, here's a 1-hour video on like the I don't even know what what kind of super little topic could be talked about. I guess one of these tiny news topics. How about this?
No. You'd have an hour and a half long video on NVMe prioritization that only consoles and servers use.
Yes, I think that would be a good idea. Yeah, or just talk for like 2 hours about two-factor authentication for Tesla.
It can't be something. No. It can't be something that simple.
It has to be something that's
it has to be
just super niche but complicated.
Yes, but it also has to be something that you haven't researched. So like you're just talking about it out of your ass for an hour and a half,
or talking about it while doing the research. So it's like,
no,
never mind.
That'd be too dry.
Yeah, maybe so.
You have to like confidently talk for an hour and a half on something you have no idea about.
That would be a lot of fun, Yeah, I could jump in and talk about, like, I could talk about like a Ceph storage clustering for like 2 hours, which is something I've never done. I just know it exists. Yeah, that would be a good idea. Just, you have SSDs hanging off of a server rack. So this next one here was interesting. I don't know if you read into this much, but
not at all.
Oh, okay. So there is unfortunately a fairly easy way for your phone calls on your phone to be eavesdropped on. So voice over LTE or VoLTE has been a thing that's been around for a while that has really increased like both call volume capacity on networks as well as call quality. So, we know way back in the days before LTE existed, call quality was absolutely awful on cell phones. So this was a big thing when it came out, and it was supposed to also add a lot of security to your phone calls. But it turns out that for less than $7,000 worth of gear, you can pretty easily eavesdrop on conversations. And you do have to know the target phone number that you want to eavesdrop on. That's not necessarily the hardest thing to get, though. It's not like having to know somebody's password or something, right? They've dubbed it ReVolt, which is an interesting name. I always like the security names here. But anyway, so it's pretty cheap for somebody to do if they really wanted to try and get information from somebody that was private, like, attacking somebody that's important. This wouldn't be that hard. And researchers were able to recover and decrypt the information from these calls for 89% of the calls that they did eavesdrop on. So it's pretty high success rate and pretty easy to do.
See, here's my thing. Can't have your calls eavesdropped on if you just don't have anybody to talk to. So everyone should just isolate from everyone socially. Don't talk to anyone ever.
Like, just never talk to anybody ever.
Yeah, quarantining for COVID, that was old school. Now we're quarantining from cell phones.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Yeah. Well, we could go back to like landlines.
No, we could have every conversation over Starlink.
Ooh, that's a good idea. I think that's a great idea. So Starlink is interesting, and I'm excited to test it, but we do have some test data.
Yeah, so Starlink is in beta right now, private beta, and while there are NDAs, that doesn't mean that people aren't running speed tests. I think there was like a specific weekend that they were like okay to run speed tests on like public services.
Okay.
Which is why it's happening now, whereas like, it's NDA'd, so like generally you wouldn't be running a speedtest.net speed test because they know it's Starlink. With the way that speed test is set up. So the info that we have here, though, is pretty interesting because there's two major things that people had questions about. Speed is obviously one of them, but more so with satellite-based internet is, can they get the latency down? Because, there's physical limitations on what they can do with latency. And obviously, current satellite internet networks have been so high up physically that they couldn't physically get the type of latency that we would expect to be more usable internet.
Yeah. It can be so bad sometimes too. It's up to like a second. Sometimes it's so bad.
Yeah. Whereas like that was one of the things with Starlink was by doing low Earth orbit for the satellites, is that the physics then made sense that they could achieve lower latencies, much lower latencies.
Yep.
And Elon Musk had tried to get the FCC to classify Starlink as like a low latency provider, and that stuff does matter for certain things. Obviously not really for consumers and how it's classified, but it does matter as far as funding, different approvals, all these different things. And Ajit Pai had initially pushed back and was going to classify them as like a high latency provider, which is 100 ms plus.
Yep.
It's a good thing that he didn't end up doing that, because what we're seeing from these speed tests is you have one speed test at 94, pretty bad, one at 75, not good, one at 53, not great, and then the rest are below 50. With
Yeah.
and there's a total of 15 right now. So you have 12 out of 15 that we know of at below 50 ms, with 4 of them being below 30.
Yeah. So that is pretty usable latency at that
Yeah.
point.
So you have 20, 20, 21, 27, 31, 31, 32, 33, 36, 39, 42, 42, 43, 75, 94. So
Yeah.
if we assume that the 94 itself is an outlier, but sometimes the 75 will happen, I would say that's much more likely. So the
Hmm.
53 and the 75 are probably pretty likely compared to the 94. We're looking at an average that's below like 39.
Yeah, so that's pretty impressive. And just to give you an example here, like I have landline internet and pinging. Well, obviously I do. I have yeah. But pinging like Google is like 12 millisecond delay for me, and that's pinging Google. That's not anything that could be higher latency than that. And so that gives you a little bit of an idea of too, is like this is not that far off. And then of course we have games and stuff, right? Where like a lot of games are like 100 to sometimes even 150 millisecond ping. Hopefully you're in like the 50 to 60 millisecond ping range, and so Starlink's looking to be capable of being in that realm.
Yeah, and Starlink's latency um, should go, not necessarily, I wouldn't say much more down than 20, but should go down for the overall average quite a bit as they increase the amount of satellites. Therefore, they can have more granular pathing for what's going to be best for latency.
Yep.
And then also when they have more ground stations in a wider variety of areas, because right now one of the issues that you would run into is that, yeah, you can send your data from your house to the satellite, but then it just has to go down somewhere and then run over the backbone network
Yeah.
because there aren't as many ground stations. And so as they can scale up the amount of ground stations, that can also further help. My guess is that they have more ground stations in Seattle, and that's why we're seeing the average speeds in Seattle be better than the average speeds in LA.
Yeah. Yeah. Which would make sense.
Plus, from what we are to understand, the higher latitudes are where the network will launch first, so further helps support why there's lower latency in Seattle versus LA.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is exciting. And touching on speeds, because there were some speeds that were released as well.
Yeah,
Um,
so we're looking at 11 to 61 down.
yep.
And then some speed tests where the down or where the upload didn't complete, but of the ones that completed, we're looking at 4.5 as the absolute lowest and 17 as the highest.
Yes. So a couple of things there is first, that's definitely not fantastic, but is actually usable. So the first thing before we say the other aspect of it is, even if this is actually what we see when it comes out, it's still going to be viable for a lot of things.
Oh yeah,
So
for rural areas, this would be game changing.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Like you can get there are people I know that like they're lucky to get like 2 megabits download, and it's really high latency because they're using satellite
And it's
internet.
usually more expensive.
Yes. So like this is still going to be a massive benefit to a large number of people, right? Like you've got to think like 50 down and like 10 up is still enough to game on and to do a lot of internet activity. It's not the fastest for downloading a game. It's not the fastest if you want to host stuff, but in those cases you shouldn't be trying to go with it anyway. But it's plenty usable for gaming, for watching video content. In fact, even watching 4K video content it's heading in that direction, and usable for several people to do normal things on the internet.
Yeah, like at these speeds, a global network, if they can offer the pricing low enough, like that could be like pretty significantly world changing, because like right now
Yes.
you have like essentially pockets of the world that have amazing internet, and then you have pockets of the world with like pretty good internet. Most of like the civilized population has pretty good internet.
Yeah.
And then you have rural communities in every country, and then you have undeveloped areas, or currently developing areas that don't have particularly great internet as well.
Yep.
And if rather than trying to, let's look at either, you look at rural communities or South America or some of the developing African nations that are developing extremely fast,
Yeah.
that need to be able to scale up internet quickly and can't lay, like they just don't have the money to lay the network fast enough,
Yeah.
realistically.
Yeah.
And so if you can scale up with this, where they just need to be able to grab the ground sites or the ground stations, and they don't need to be able to, or they aren't required to like lay the network, that could open up internet in areas that can otherwise afford something like this, but just currently don't have the access.
Yeah, yeah, and so this could be game changing already with those speeds. There's so many things that would benefit from it, and like you said, the pricing is like a lot of people that do have good internet access in places. There's still no competition there, right? And so
Mhm.
like in those areas, this is bringing some level of competition into those areas. And there's plenty of people I know that pay like $80 a month for their internet and are getting like 100 by 50. And it's like
Mhm.
for those people, what if they could spend half that and they're getting like 50 by 20 or something like
And
that.
that's all they need. If that's the case,
If that's
then
what they need, then it's saving them money, and it's providing some level of competition for the speeds. But
yeah. And one last thing before we move on to the next part of it.
yeah.
The latency is a big enough deal, like it is low enough that because this latency is like localized, but like the thing with wired internet versus what we are to expect from the physics of how satellite internet could work is that it actually ends up being faster than wired internet when you're looking at like very, very, very long distances.
Yeah, like here to
When you're
Oregon and New
looking at
York type stuff.
that, or even more so, like when you're talking like people in Wall Street trying to um, trade in Asia,
Yes, yeah, that's true.
that type of thing. SpaceX will be able to charge so much money for, because they could charge $5,000 a month and it would be profitable for these people,
Yeah, if they
because
can just
latency matters
have.
when you're trading at such a large scale.
Yeah.
And so that they could probably charge $10,000 a month and
Yep.
get people to sign up
And
for
the
that.
the underwater pipelines for that are not particularly low latency. This
No.
is going to be lower latency just because of physics. It's going to be lower latency than running light through fiber.
Mhm.
But then also the fact that it's not having to go through a lot of ground-based stations where you connect up to the satellite and then it just shoots it across the planet, pretty close to the speed of light and then back down to where it needs to be.
Yeah. And then the point I was trying to make with that is, so since they have a market that they can charge a lot of money for, and military is another example where it sounds like they have deals with the I think the army, and so they'll be able to charge them a lot of money too. And so if they can charge certain outlets a very large sum of money, then that means that they can charge normal consumers and developing countries in these different areas
A lot
even
less.
less.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. And correct me if I'm wrong, but are they planning to roll this out like over the oceans as well, so that you could have internet like this, on boats and cruises and planes and stuff?
They haven't talked about it,
Okay,
but based just on the fact that the military is interested in it, I would assume that the Navy's going to jump on board.
like that's the eventual
Um,
goal at least.
like there's no reason, there is a reason initially as they're rolling it out, but once they actually have the full network in place, there's no reason not to do that, because the
Yeah.
satellites will still be over that area.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Because I mean, for the time being, as this being rolled out, like right now, say like if you could use it, like obviously it's still using. I always forget the name of it, but the underwater pipelines to go to anywhere that's not in the same continent. But that'll change, and so like I guess at that point they would have to put the satellites either over the ocean, or they would have to have just a couple satellites with higher performance, kind of like the pipeline temporarily to transmit
Well,
to the other side.
I don't think the satellites are geostationary. And since they're
Right.
not
Yeah.
geostationary, you
They
would
wouldn't
have to
really be able
cover
to.
every,
Yeah.
yeah, you'd have to cover everywhere anyway.
Yeah, that's right. That's a good point. They couldn't just leave them there. Yeah. So I'm guessing, for starters, though, it probably is going to use the underwater pipelines, as it rolls out from beta and
Yeah,
stuff. But
as soon as they have, so from my understanding, what the plan is to start with the upper latitudes, which would include the upper U.S. It would include Europe and
yeah,
Russia and that portion, and then go down from there. Get the Southern California, I mean, better
Yeah.
covered. And then, it would eventually cover Southern Asia,
Australia, that kind of stuff.
northern parts of South America, and then slowly go down from there.
And eventually,
Um,
the goal I think is probably to have this at the poles and stuff too. So you basically just have this anywhere on the planet, right?
they haven't like even in their example images, they don't cover the poles.
Oh, okay.
That being said, I don't know how the physics works at that area, because I doubt North and South Pole. Its latency would less so be the benefit.
It's just the having internet there that's usable that would be beneficial.
Yeah, having
Yeah.
better internet, and it would still be much better latency even if there was no satellites super close,
Yeah.
because the current satellite network is so physically high up,
Right.
that this would make up for that in that way. And so I don't know if maybe their plan is to just like only go so high and so low in the latitude department, and then just beam the network there if it's being used.
Yeah. Right. Right. Okay.
I also could see them eventually covering the North Pole sooner than the South Pole, because while there are currently research stations in Antarctica, the North Pole, as the poles melt, is going to become a major shipping hub. And so we'll likely see more infrastructure up there that's actually utilized versus um, the South Pole, where it's just research.
Right. Okay. Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah. I'm gonna be interested to see what comes of that though. Because yeah, you're right. I was digging around on their site. There's like zero official word on anything like that. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. They are ion propelled though.
I think that's pretty common though for CubeSats
No,
that
they're the
have
first to do it.
propulsion. Oh,
Yeah, like here it says like their Starlink satellites are equipped with efficient ion thrusters powered by krypton, and then they're the first krypton propelled spacecraft ever flown. It's
well, they're
interesting.
the first ion thrusters
Yeah.
that use krypton then. But
Yes, correct. But anyway, just thought that was funny. um, but then the other aspect of this, of those speeds, like this is still early. Like this is basically alpha stage still.
Mhm.
And that's the other important thing for people to remember is like this is closed private beta. Not a lot of people have access to it. I'm hoping to get into the public beta as soon as possible to bring you guys whatever is allowed under the NDA official information on this. So I'm definitely going to be giving it a try.
Yeah, because like there's no way that this is the max of what the satellites themselves can handle,
Yeah.
unless they're only connected to that first batch of satellites and they aren't connecting to any of the subsequent ones that have been launched.
Right.
Because the actual production Starlink sats can handle 20 gigabits per second.
Right, like between each other as well, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
And so it's like you would need a couple hundred people sending data both ways at 50 megabits per second to max that out.
yeah.
Or, quite a large amount of people sending data at normal internet usage to max that out.
Yes.
So there's no way that this is max. Now, one of two things is possible. Either they are, I mean, there's a lot of things possible, but like that I think is likely is that they are probably not operating these at full transmission strength, for one.
Yep.
And then two, due to lack of ground stations, they probably aren't even bothering to operate at full speed.
Yeah, and the one thing I will say is the upload speeds are probably not going to improve a ton. But the download I would expect to improve quite a bit.
It depends. I guess it just depends on what the limiting factor is for those upload speeds. If it is transmission power,
Yeah, which I think it's going to be due to
yeah.
regulation.
But it also could be like they're just prioritizing downlink right now
Yeah, right.
in how the satellites are operating.
Well, and that's still plenty of upload for normal people.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, so it wouldn't necessarily be what I would want. It's not, but it's
Well,
actually
no, you want 1 billion gigabits per microsecond.
Yes, but the other thing is, like, when you think about that, like, let's say like it's 20 realm of 20 megs a second up, like that's still like half of what you get with the highest end plan you can get from Comcast. That's kind of ridiculous to show you the level of speed limiting that we're having with these other ISPs.
Yeah.
Like the upload speeds are just garbage intentionally, and it sucks.